You know you're being conned when a severe measure like a 3-year closure of the snapper fishery is proposed, and one side of the argument that has a lot to lose is silent during the public debate. So why haven't the commercial fishers, through their associations, come out swinging against Fishery Minister Whetstone's 2 options that will see the closure of both gulfs to snapper fishing for 3 years? It's a smokescreen for the main game to get wrecks off the 4 primary species. Well, let's unpack Whetstone's proposal. Option A is to close the entire state down for 3 years. Option B is to close both gulfs and the west coast down for 3 years, but leave the southeast open for 7 months. He's introduced a total allowable recreational catch, or TAC, to be set, and recreational fishers will be able to buy tags sufficient to cover the TAC in order to fish for the snapper. The pros will have a total allowable catch, or TAC, set for the southeast, but this TAC will not be used when TACs are finally introduced for them in 2022, the time the current marine scale fishery review is completed. Now here's a very salient point. Right at this time, a working group is looking at what changes need to be made to the Fisheries Management Act 2007, which contains the right of recreational fishers to a certain allocation of species. You can bet your bottom dollar this will be changed in the Act so the commercial sector can have unfettered access to the state's 4 primary species: snapper, King George whiting, garfish and calamari. I hope you all picked up from Whetstone's press release when he suggested that during the snapper closure, recreational should target secondary species like Tommy Ruffs, salmon, yellowfin whiting and leatherjackets. No mention of the 3 other primary species, King George whiting, garfish or calamari. I did notice he said leatherjackets this time rather than ocean jackets that he has wielded around for 18 months, finally realising that you can only catch them off the continental shelf using special traps. In September last year, he put together a snapper working group and made some minor changes before the opening of this current snapper season. This group has had several meetings looking at ways to protect the snapper stocks. At its last meeting, it made several recommendations. However, not one of those included closing the fishery for 3 years or the introduction of a TAC or tags for the recreational sector. So where did these suggestions come from? Because the working group hasn't met since. 3 weeks ago, the Marine Scale Fishery Review Workshop held its last meeting, recommending that a TAC be implemented on recreational fishers for the 4 primary species, and that tags for these species should also be introduced. Within a week of that meeting, the Marine Fishers Association posted on its Facebook page a photo of a young woman who had bagged out on calamari on York Peninsula. It drew the long bow that this number of squid, at $35 a kilogram, was a commercial quantity that should go to the pro fishers. Now, most of those pros who target snapper have re-equipped to catch calamari because they're getting 3 times the amount for this species than snapper. It's called effort shift, and during the next 3 years they'll surely decimate King George whiting, garfish and squid because they don't have a TAC on them. Don't forget that the MSF review is not expected to be released until 2022, but some of its recommendations have already been made by Whetstone on advice directly from PIRSA, which targets recreational fishers. Now, PIRSA's main aim, and that of the MSF, is to phase out recreational fishing for the 4 primary species. They'll do that by introducing a TAC on those stocks, claiming the trial of the system in the southeast during the snapper closure worked extremely well. The precedent has been set to let them go ahead. Changes to the Fisheries Management Act will reflect that. As far as pushing all this through, Whetstone will announce public consultation on all steps, but only using the government's Your Say website to gather data, knowing that less than 1% of this state's fishers who actually trust this site will bother to vote. As for this current snapper crisis, it has come about by SARDI, the scientific arm of PIRSA, claiming its latest biomass estimates have fallen through the floor. But in its own document to the last Snapper Group workshop, it stated quite clearly that it relied only on a small sampling because of bad weather at the time. It also stated the error margins of the biomass estimates were extraordinarily high. But PIRSA and Whetstone have used this data to justify their current actions. So what are the pros getting out of it all? It's simple. A TAC on rakes along with tags and very restricted access to snapper, King George whiting, garfish and calamari. They know they can't win an argument for a recreational fishing licence, so they've come up with this strategy. No wonder the pros are super quiet on the current closure for 3 years. Think it's a pipe dream? Just watch as it unfolds.